Welcome to Health, Vengeance and Harmonies. I'm Leonardo Muller-Rodriguez, a PhD student exploring the intersections between neuroscience, music therapy and sleep. Before I introduce my lovely guest Daniel here, I will explain briefly the inspiration behind the podcast, which is based on the concept of René Girard, his concept of mimetic desire, which is that mimetic desire is the fact that human desire is shaped by imitation. Human desire aims to imitate the aims of other people, and that's a force underlying social emotions and social interactions. On the positive aspect of this, there's compassion, empathy, healing towards those who are similar to us. And on the negative side of this, there's rivalry, scapegoating, and disconnection. These concepts can be useful when thinking about social dynamics, or scientifically known as multi-agent interactions, which is a specialty for our guest today, Daniel. So Daniel Polani, welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast.
No, it's a pleasure. So Daniel Polani is a professor of artificial intelligence and a director of the Center for Computer Science and...
They changed it. It's now called the Center for AI and Robotics Research.
And robotics as well, very important.
Yes.
You started your academic journey at the University of Mainz in Germany. That's where you did your PhD. Then you went to the University of Lübeck, right?
Yes.
Now you're at Hertfordshire. You're very interested in AI and robotics and cognition, applying that with information theory. How else would you describe yourself, Daniel?
Well, I'm a person who likes to put order or see the order in confusing things. I like to understand things. I like to see different facets of things. So basically, I find that it is surprising. The more you look at things, the more different facets you see. Even very simple things suddenly are like a diamond. They shine differently from different sides. And what I really like about seemingly simple questions is that they sometimes turn out to be extremely deep, extremely complicated. And the more you start digging into them, the more they reveal. In fact, I keep saying, for example, when you look at theories, the best theories are theories that know more than their inventor.
Ah, interesting. Very interesting insight there. Theories that have more impact than the inventor, than the creator. Just to mention here your website at the university, where you can explore more about Daniel's research interests and go and see his papers. And yeah, very interesting stuff here. Of course, this is a very cool photo. What is going on here? Seems like you won a cup playing football with robots.
This is one of my favorite activities. It is actually quite an activity that I have been pursuing for quite a while, and it is called a RoboCup, which is a series of competitions, of robotic competitions, which started actually in 1997. And one of the things about this competition was, at that time, AI was one topic, a bit obscure topic at that time. Robotics was basically industrial robotics. You had machines that would produce stuff and fixed scripts. And although some people realized that there is a link between them, it was not brought together. One thing that happened in 1997, if you may remember, is that Kasparov, the world's strongest chess player, and then one of the still strongest chess players of all times relative to his peers, was actually defeated by a chess program, Deep Blue. And this was momentous. Okay, Kasparov may not have been playing his best, but it was clear that the supremacy of human intellect in terms of chess playing was actually at that point gone. People started asking, well, clearly chess doesn't seem to be as difficult for machines as for humans, because it is very mechanical in the sense you can predict arbitrarily far into the future what's going to happen as long as you have enough computational power. And so people thought, okay, let's go to something which humans do very well, but which is very difficult for machines. And that is football.
Mm.
Football looks very simple, but it is incredibly complicated because you have a body you have to move. The body has to both control, see the world, interpret the world, understand where things are, especially the ball. If the ball is being occluded, it's not gone, it's still in the game, but where is the ball now? And then you have to be able to walk. Walking is a very difficult task because you're constantly falling. Basically,
Mm.
whenever you detach the leg and you make the step forward, you are falling. You're controlled falling, which is we control it very well,
Mhm.
but we have forgotten how difficult it is because we learned it in a very early age, and we learned it while we were very small, and the cost of falling was low. Adults that fall usually hurt themselves much worse than children that do.
Fair enough.
The other thing is kicking the ball. One reason why football is such an interesting thing compared, for example, to handball and basketball, they had certainly their challenges, but
Mhm.
in football, you have both to move and to control the ball with the same legs. So
Mm.
in handball, you run. So the control of the movement is basically by the legs, and but the control of the ball with the hands. It's
Right.
basically separated. In
Different. Yeah.
football, you need to manage. You need to do housekeeping between what you do with your legs. Do you move? Do you kick the ball? Do you do both? Of course, the masters of the game, see here one of them, they do both, and they can
Mm.
actually combine the need to move the body with a essence of controlling the essence of controlling the ball. And that I
Mm.
think is the universal attraction of football. And for
Mm.
robots, when you do robots, you notice that. As humans, you don't notice it because
Interesting.
humans very intuitive. But as when you handle robots, you realize all the things you don't know you actually have to pay attention to.
Fair enough. Yeah. I guess that's a passion maybe of a computer scientist having to actually put step by step what is actually happening, for example, in a football player. And it's goes beyond to because there's so many innate aspects as you're just explaining for when you are running. It turns out that we're falling and we're doing it better than our body is equipped with a lot of tools that we're not conscious of necessarily, and that's
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
It has a lot of sensors. That is definitely one of the secrets of success. And there is something about the control and the brain, how it works, that manages the balance of resources that you need to maintain to make good decisions,
Hmm.
which is something that big AIs that are very successful now do not do. They can be essentially quite, let's call it wasteful with resources. You can have a power plant running a data center, and you need that.
Hmm.
While if you look at humans, human brains run on 20 watts. So
Right.
while you had incandescent lamps, now with LEDs not true anymore, but incandescent lamps, the lamp that goes off on a comic and a cartoon
Hmm.
above the head of the inventor um, uses more energy than the brain that had the idea, which is kind of
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just here a random Reddit post is giving it between you know 100 milliwatts, is it?
I would say megawatts.
Megawatts, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so that is, that we're talking here about the level where you start thinking about a nuclear reactor to run a few of these.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Wow, wow. Yeah, so the brain and cognition is something very interesting. And speaking of sensors, which you mentioned here with the robots and our bodies having loads of sensors, there's this neuroscience perspective saying that we have actually at least 32 senses, not to the five senses, and uh, and that's allowing us, as you say, to move, to run, to play football. And you're very interested in understanding how this works and how cognition works. And in essence, talking about sensors and the environment, you are taking this approach of information theory. And you're saying that cognition is the study of information exchange through sensors and through actuators, which is, in essence, is acting and perceiving in biological terms. And well, one concept you've developed, which is a bit further down the line of understanding of defining cognition, is empowerment. And
Mhm.
um, so, how maybe we can start about why was information theory an interesting approach for understanding cognition, and then we can move to empowerment.
That is a very interesting question. So, number one, the interesting question is if you handle cognition, let's put it this way, for a long time, there was no clear way to do it. So people basically, there are people that we came from psychology or behavioral psychology and just simply put their observations into their AI models one by one. Personally, I don't like that because, first of all, I don't think we learn much from that. It's just a collection of facts at this point. Second, I'm originally trained as a physicist. I studied math and physics, and I'm trained as a physicist. And as a physicist, you do not like proliferation of principles. But more importantly, if you think from an evolutionary perspective, evolution is essentially the assumption that nature doesn't make big inventions often, or it's very hard to make them. So I would say it is much more likely that evolution discovers. I mean, evolution is not an actuator agent in the normal sense, but let's talk about discovery. Evolution discovers principles very rarely, new principles, and the rest is simply incremental change. So my postulate would be that there are just few principles that are being just used to the limit. And now the question is, how do you handle cognition? Now, the interesting question about that is handling cognition means handling in what we call information, now in the colloquial sense. And now it becomes very interesting because handling information is a problem that has been around for a while. When information theory was founded, Claude Shannon actually made it powerful by depriving it, by denuding it
Hmm.
of any semantic meaning. That was the
Hmm.
big step. Until then, everybody thought, oh, it has to be a meaning. And then he basically took it away. He took the meaning away.
Hmm.
Suddenly, you would be able to say things about data, and I will not call it information anymore, data transmitted from A to B, and making that transmission reliable. So, making that transition reliable um, is subject to very specific laws that can be formulated mathematically. And in fact, it turned out that these laws, one of the principles behind it was the concept of entropy.
Hmm.
There's actually a funny anecdote about that word. Um,
Right.
and I'll mention that in a second. But the
Sure.
concept of entropy, which looks surprisingly analog to that in physics. So the the question is when two terms look the same, come from completely different sources,
Hmm.
the instinct of a scientist is always, that's not by chance. There's something deep in there. Doesn't have to be. Maybe it's not, right?
Hmm.
But you get suspicious. And we now know that the links are very, very deep. The links between the laws of data transmissions and the laws of, as it turns out, thermodynamics
Hmm.
are very, very deep. There's a very recent field that just opened up in that form perhaps 10, 15 years ago. It's called stochastic thermodynamics for those who are interested in learning more about it. It's a very
Mhm.
new field and it's growing very fast.
Mhm.
Um, Alternatively, now we have this concept of data transmissions. And it was a big point of, oh, okay, yes, let's imbue it with meaning and semantics and what an organism wants to do. And this failed initially quite badly. With one exception, Ashby was able to formulate a statement about agents and control, a very simple statement that if you want to control difficult environment, you have
Mm.
to have a variety of available options. But there
Okay.
was not much. There was not. It was very minimal. Very minimal. Very mathematics was very limited.
Mhm.
And for many years, people tried to imbue information theory with meaning. It
Mhm.
failed, strangely enough. And in fact, it caused a famous researcher, Gibson. He actually said, well, information theory doesn't work with agents living in an environment because the
Mm.
environment is not a receiver that listens to your messages. And
Okay.
it's not a sender that wants to send messages. So he
Mm.
basically said, it's dead. Well,
Mhm.
he's a smart guy, but he was wrong. And it turns out, yes, it's possible to do that. And it's possible also to endow um, information with meaning.
Mm.
In fact, the key for that was already set by Shannon in the 60s, but nobody saw it. With one
Ah.
exception. With one exception. I always kept joking that at some point after I started doing this research, some obscure Russian guy in the 50s may have already done that. Turned out it was a Russian guy, but not obscure, namely Stratonovich. And it didn't
Stratonovich.
do he didn't do it in the 50s, he did it in the 60s. And he already saw that you can make decision theory uh, and trade decisions off against the information required. What he did not do, which we learned to do, and our basically in the aughts, the 2000s, is to do that for sequential decision problems.
Mm.
So for the problems that today people would call reinforcement learning, problems
Ah.
where you make decisions over time
Mhm.
and the rewards accumulate over time.
Mhm.
This is new, or relatively new now. It's
Mhm.
not that new anymore. And today everybody will say, oh, it's trivial. I can assure you it is not. It was not trivial when it started in the aughts.
Mm.
So clearly one had to make a couple of mental steps to combine information with what actually you want to do. And that can be done in a systematic way. And now it's a very active research field. So in other words,
Fascinating.
the question of semantic information can be answered, in fact, with tools that existed in the 60s. But people did not see how to do that for some reason.
That's fascinating. It's an interesting history to go through. That's nice to hear that. I appreciate that, Daniel. Um, and the type of because I have the neuroscience background, the person that I've learned about combining information and cognition has been Carl Friston's work and his colleagues. That has been um, uh, where I've mostly learned about this active inference. And
Mhm.
there's
Yep.
a lot of parallels actually with your work, which is the perception action loop. It's
Yep.
very much present in your work. And um, yes, so I just wanted to show you this paper. I'm not sure if you are familiar with quantum information theory being applied to cognition. Um, there's
Vaguely.
this paper I just went through recently. They were discussing the fact that evolution and development, so within the changes within one lifetime, and evolution, the changes throughout different generations, are actually the same process of actually developing sensors that allow you to understand a greater amount of complexity in the abiotic environment, so the physical environment that is not biological. So that's the main message of that paper, which is interesting.
Okay, I think I know the second author
Yeah.
well,
Okay.
but I don't know this paper. If you could send it to me,
I
I
will. Yes, I will do that after.
thank you.
Yes, an interesting one. Does it make you think of anything specifically
It
that?
does. It rings a lot of bells. It rings a whole
Fantastic.
Notre Dame cathedral. I need a hunchback of Notre Dame to ring them all. Um, Basically, what I saw from the very few glances on the
Mhm,
abstract, I saw this complementarity between processes and objects. Interestingly, this is not a field I'm an expert in. I'm just dabbling in it recently. It's
mhm,
category theory, which essentially, to some extent, I can imagine that you could actually map objects to processes and processes to objects. So there's a maybe duality, but I have no idea what that would mean.
perfect.
So I have actually to ask my local category theorists what they think about this idea, because I didn't think
Cool.
about that, but maybe there's something, some new facets. We have turned the diamond a little bit, and oh, okay, that looks now different, and
Mm,
maybe there's something new to be seen there. So,
interesting. Well, what I can tell you from what I've understood from the paper, got here, I'm looking at my notes. In terms of objects and processes, the way that they're describing an object is that it's um, the same thing or the same object in a different position in space or through time is linked through a morphism, which I guess is some sort of function that changes it.
oh, that
And
sounds like they do category theory, actually.
yeah, fair enough.
It sounds like that written exactly that. So I have not read the paper, but already start guessing
Yeah,
where
no,
it's
it's
going. Okay.
exciting. Yeah, yeah. So, and in terms of describing a sensor, actually, it's they do an analogy to radio stations, FM radio stations. Now, I think there's a link here to objects. Yes, so the sensor is, or detector is something that determines what type of signal or objects are available within the range of the sensor, what kind of variations therefore occur within that range, or what of the signal, and therefore what actions can be implemented within that, because what is perceivable can be acted upon. And that actually goes with the empowerment concept, which is interesting. But yeah, so that's and there's, I think, a strong relationship with time and object perception in this paper, whereby the more your sensors are capable of greater complexity, the more time you can process in the background. That's the kind of association, I think. So because you use selective attention to be on a certain object, um, um, and I think because you have a greater complexity, the rest of the sensors are decreased to be background time processing. I think there's a lot to unpack in that before we can, but it would be worth to hear your thoughts once you read, or you have already some thoughts that you'd like to share before
I
we move
mean,
on to
we can look
empowerment.
at time in a very simple way. We can look at it in a very deep way. Time is one of the most biggest mysteries.
Hmm.
Time. Some people think time is linked to consciousness. Some people think um, time may be grounded in the way the universe expands. Some people think time is simply a breaking of a symmetry. Let's put
Hmm.
it this way: we can spend here like easily 4 hours and discuss time, and we will not have even scratched the surface. For the time and causality are very linked, and that is a
Hmm.
relatively obvious link, actually. So we don't know causality very well, we don't know time very well, so we are on a good level. So my view is there are two ways of looking at time. If you look from the perspective of causality, time um, is a strong constraint of what we perceive as causal. Of course, once you go to the quantum level, it's not clear what causality means exactly, and that is
Mhm.
something that needs to be discussed. It might be actually an artifact of our the fact that we are processing. We're living in this environment. But I would say for now, I think it's more useful for our discussion simply to think time as something that limits causality in a certain way, and we can at this point just use causality as a working concept. It's simply the fact
Mhm.
I can concentrate an action, an intervention, they call it, on a certain part of the system, and it has downstream consequences, downstream in time. That is
Mhm.
our operational working assumption here, right?
Mm. Mm.
Uh, because I don't want to
Right.
unpack the
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
thing. We will not end. This podcast will take longer than the filibuster of this guy and the Congress.
Yes, I think
So
that's a good working concept, and we can actually. You mentioned that causality and time are linked in the sense that time allows to events in time that are sequential tend to be causal. Is that a way to describe it, or?
it's the opposite. If
Okay.
they're not sequential in time, they cannot be causal.
Okay. Yes.
The other direction doesn't hold necessarily. The fact that
Hmm.
I am now drinking my coffee here
Yeah.
probably has little effect on some guy in Mongolia chasing his cattle, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. Okay.
basically,
I like that distinction. So, um, non-sequential temporal events cannot be causal.
yes. So
That's
basically, something happens yesterday can't be linked to me doing something, deciding to do something now.
okay.
That's it's an exclusive principle, not an inclusive one.
Okay.
What we know from Einstein is that it's actually even stronger. In fact, that the causal effect can only spread at a certain speed. That's the speed of
Mm,
light locally, right?
right.
So that's very important because at Newton's physics, in principle, it can be instantaneous. So if I do something now, I can in principle put make something happen very far away.
Hmm.
Newton never. I don't know whether he never worried about that, but at least we are not aware, or I'm not aware that he did, that
Hmm.
if gravity changes, say if Earth explodes now, hopefully
Hmm.
not, but if that happens, the gravitational effect will instantaneously affect the moon.
Hmm.
Um, that is something I don't know whether Newton thought about that. As far as I understand Newton's theory is definitely not taking any time difference into consideration. So if the
Right.
Earth starts to split now,
Hmm.
that effect happens immediately at the moon.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
if now the speed of light was known at that time, so Newton must have intentionally just ignored it, right?
Hmm.
We know, for example, Ole Römer. I think that was 17th century. He was able to measure the speed of light in a
Hmm.
very ingenious way by observing the occlusion of moons of Jupiter. So
Hmm.
we're far away, and he actually correctly he saw some discrepancy in the occlusion over
Hmm.
the year, and he concluded rightly that this is precisely the speed of light that causes it. Brilliant idea. I mean, there
Amazing.
were clever people all the time, right?
Hmm. Amazing.
I also recommend Terence Tao's amazing podcast about how to measure the universe.
Hmm.
I heard only the first part, but it was amazing. I learned things that I didn't know, and I thought I knew a lot about ancient science. Anyway,
Amazing.
back to our uh,
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So I think
yeah,
speaking of causality, um, I'm just showing the podcast. I think this is the one.
yes.
So
Yes, yes.
regarding causality, I haven't seen it, but I'll watch it. So Causality, so non-sequential events cannot be causal. That's what we're working with.
Yes.
And another important aspect is actually for a cognitive agent or a cognitive individual is that they perceive actually their causal outcomes. So the fact that I move and I create some sort of effect is great. But if I'm aware of the fact that I created that effect, that gives me power. And this is a concept that you've applied to robotics and computation, which is, you call it empowerment. And which is exactly that. And maybe more specifically in terms of the maths is talking about channel capacity of an
Mm-hmm.
actuator. And so the perceived channel capacity, right, of an actuator, right?
Yes.
Um, Now I found this description of channel capacity. Channel capacity is if there's noise variance. If there's none of it, your capacity is high.
Mm-hmm.
Alternatively, if you can allow many inputs of your actuator, your capacity is high.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, what would you like the audience to know about empowerment? And
Okay, let's first start with what it is. We formalize it as a channel capacity because the formalism is just turned out to be very useful. But first,
Mhm,
let's look at the motivation. Let's assume you are playing a video game and you have a joystick and you play the game, and now you can just move left and right. And there are monsters coming, and now, of course, if you could jump, it would be better. So if I give you a jump, you can escape the monsters more easily. You have more options. If I can now move into a corner or go out of their way, that's even better. So the more options I have, the better chances I have to survive. Now, this is the basic thing. Now, if I don't know that, say it's a 2D game, and I don't know that when I'm moving the joystick forward, I'm actually moving away from the niche,
mhm,
I cannot make use of this knowledge. Right?
mhm,
Sometimes the monster catches me, sometimes the monster doesn't catch me, and I say, what did I do? Why did it catch me now, and why didn't it catch me then? And you don't see that actually your player moves into the niche or out of the niche. You can't see it because it's flat. You have no
mhm,
sensor. So you don't feel like you have the power. But if I see, for example, the player becomes smaller when it moves out of the plane, becomes smaller, then yes, I can move it away and close it to myself, and I can see what the player does and make it actually escape the monster reliably. The
mhm,
other thing is, and now we talk about the noise, imagine the joystick is noisy. So whatever I control, it reacts with unpredictable delay, or let's leave delay out of the game, just unpredictably. And it sometimes does what you want, but not always. It's like white
yeah,
noise. And then, of course, you would prefer that this noise be low. So there may be areas like a waterfall where the joystick may be less reliable. And then, so you don't want to move into the waterfall because even if it provides you protection from the monster, it might be actually harder to control what you have. So,
mm,
another example where empowerment is low. So, in short,
mm,
empowerment is controlling, being able to control something, having degrees to control. It goes up if you have more degrees to control. It goes up if you see more about the change. And it goes down when there is noise. That's
mm,
kind of in a nutshell. It turns out
mhm,
that the mathematical concept of channel capacity does exactly that,
mm.
and in a very precise and well understood way. And
Fantastic.
so that's how we actually did that. And
Mm,
we actually took the term from social sciences. So they use empowerment to say disenfranchised groups that are when you tell them they can change the situation they are in, which
mhm,
is not enough. They have to know that they can change it.
mm,
And that is why we call it empowerment, because it's exactly copying or formalizing mathematically something that these activists and researchers have been saying for ages.
Hmm.
So the term is not just incidentally the same, it's
Mhm.
intentionally the same.
Interesting. Interesting. That's a very interesting step towards awareness, and maybe we can talk about here of well, to some extent, knowing. So empowerment requires the capacity for acting, requires a actuator,
Hmm.
and this makes me think also of neurodisability in some cases when you get some sort of you need to rehabilitate because of certain illness or disease. There, your actuators become noisier. You lose your empowerment. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and there is this in empowerment, it's about your local environment. How can you act with what you have? How capable are you? But also, what options can you do? How many possible futures can you act, right? There's that aspect as well.
There are many, once it's again this like this diamond, right? The more you
Mhm,
turn it around, the more aspects you see about it. One way of looking at empowerment is how many distinct futures can you select from?
mhm, mhm.
So choose your future, right?
Choose the
Like
future,
that.
yeah.
Choose your future. It can be bad futures, good futures. It doesn't. It just counts them, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
say they're better or worse. It just says you have more or less futures. And having more futures, that's a postulate, is in general better. It's not always better. There are traps. There are traps, but in
Hmm.
general, it is better because having more futures means there are more ways to escape your monsters.
Hmm.
In life, I mean, humans are usually quite remote from direct predator and direct threat to life.
Hmm.
We have created an environment that is protective, at least in the Western world.
Yeah.
But the reality is that we have evolved in a
Hmm.
possibly adversarial environment. And empowerment can be seen as an expression of an evolutionary pressure to not waste time or not waste effort with actuators whose effect you never see. If I have an
Hmm.
actuator that can remote control a plane 10 kilometers away and I don't know it, yeah, so
Yeah.
there's actually a movie which actually this illustrates that very nicely. I forgot how it was called. I think Colossus or something, Colossal or something,
Hmm.
and where it's basically I think it was Anne Hathaway and her boyfriend. I'm afraid if you there's no now a spoiler coming.
Okay. No worries.
So it's okay. Yes,
Yeah.
good.
I mean, yeah, it's all good. All good. For me, it's good.
Yeah, so you can give a signal for a spoiler when it's over. So basically, they get in a fight and whatever, and completely parallel to that, there are monsters actually devastating South Korea. And later it turns out there's actually a curse in their garden. Whenever they step in, their figure is basically replicated as a monster in South Korea. So there's this. It's a bit absurd, and it's
Yeah.
yes, that's the one. That's the one. Yes,
Cool. All right.
and
Yeah.
the point is, at the beginning of the movie, she does not know that,
Hmm.
and so she tramples on the inhabitants of Seoul in South Korea completely inadvertently. And after a while, she realizes that. And anyway, the movie then goes on. But I found this idea of okay, you have this incredible power, you have no idea you have it,
Mm.
versus the moment you get it. That's the moment
Right.
when you get the empowerment.
Interesting. There's a very important distinction there about realizing, and actually want to do a link to because last time we met, we talked about information integration theory, and this could link to knowing, or at least I wonder what you think about that. So, this is a theory of how consciousness could work from an information theoretic perspective. And so, when we talk about consciousness, it's mainly like phenomenology, which is described here in this little part of the I mean, that's the way I see it.
Yes,
Everyone
yes,
sees
yes.
it differently. But and one important claim from that theory is that um, it's linked to complexity, but specifically um, internal causal complexity. So, to what extent I can affect myself, um, and that's what is important to this to say this physical system has consciousness. It's not just complexity, but it is the capacity to influence itself. Um, Now, have you thought about how um, the capacity to influence oneself contributes to empowerment?
Uh, I mean, let's distinguish a couple of things, right? So, if you talk about IIT, I happen to know a bit. I'm not an expert at all, by no means, but I kind of know the philosophy of it to some extent. So, one of the problems with consciousness is that it's extremely hard to capture this concept
Mhm.
scientifically.
Quantify. Yeah.
To quantify, not just to quantify, just to say,
Yeah.
is somebody conscious? You see somebody in locked in syndrome, you have no
Mhm.
idea. Are they locked in, or are they just comatose and without no consciousness at all?
Right.
And so one of the only testable hypotheses are people who are in locked in and then wake up and then can report. That's kind of the
Hmm.
most important case. Or if you look at anesthetics, so people have wondered about that, and I'm far from a consciousness researcher. So whatever I say it as a bystander in a way. But there are so many ways of looking at it. Some people even say it's a trivial question. They say it's not a question at all. Personally, I don't agree with that because I do feel it's obviously a phenomenon, but
Hmm.
it's a very difficult to objectify phenomenon. So normally we have this things happen, and maybe you observe in physics, for example, the observation in quantum physics, the observation used to be also some people hypothesize a link with consciousness. With decoherence theory, you can get rid of that, right? It's all objective. You know exactly what's going to happen. You know how it operates. No need for consciousness. Um,
Hmm.
so there's a lot of controversy. Is that a question at all? Personally, I think it is. The IIT idea is based on it's I think mostly driven by Tononi and Sporns. Later, Tononi mostly was coming from this direction, and he basically argues that because it's a primal phenomenon, he actually works with axioms. He formulates these different axioms. I think you showed five. I think that
Yeah.
was the axioms, and he says this is the postulate. This is where we start from, and then he derives his theory based on these axioms, which I think is a perfectly legitimate way to do that,
Hmm.
because he basically said the phenomenology is primal. I cannot convince you that what I see now, for example, has a certain color, right? We may talk about red, and
Yeah.
we see completely different things.
Hmm.
Um, it is, I mean, a simple way of seeing that. If you take your camera and you look at the sunset, you always wonder why your camera
Hmm.
doesn't capture the colors of the sunset correctly. So
True.
it's very
Good example.
clear.
Yeah.
We don't even know that we see the colors the same way. But maybe we don't, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So in other words, I do think the phenomenology is a fair starting point. It's not the only starting point. There are others. Um, but now the question that you ask is if we go the IIT route. So
Hmm.
IIT basically is not so much concerned about the channel capacity of a system with itself,
Hmm.
at least not primarily. So what it is concerned with is to try to, if I look at the informational description of IIT, because
Yeah.
there are others that have been come out in the last years.
Okay.
It's about the causal complexity in a way, in the fact
Yeah.
that you cannot easily take the system and make it modular. You cannot split it up easily without losing something. You can basically you have interactions on all levels
Mm.
of complexity. That is a important component of this theory. In IIT, they give particular weights to these different components, but it can be shown, this is work by Nihat I and I think Knauf, I and Knauf, that you can actually write the whole hierarchy. It's a bit like Fourier transformation. It's like a spectral decomposition of the complexities.
Mm-hmm.
And different ways of measuring complexity give different weights to the different levels. But
Mm.
maybe the right way to look at it is just to look at the whole spectrum and just not giving weights, not trying to
Okay.
get a single number, but
Right.
actually treating all the levels. There are the different contributions at different levels, and that's what it
Right.
is.
Interesting. Yeah.
That is just speculation. Didn't do that, right? So just just
Fair enough. Yeah.
giving my 2 cents.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So if a system can be deconstructed into different complexities, it can be analogous to an audio frequency spectrum where the bass sounds are important just as much as the higher, or maybe vocal sounds if we're using that kind of a analogy. So yeah, it's I like that. That's interesting. I remember that you mentioned that you were reviewing a PhD thesis that showed that the measure of IIT of consciousness, which is called phi, which is with all these postulates, attempts to quantify the level of consciousness of a system. This thesis demonstrated that phi increases when an organism is actively learning, in the case of playing and simulating. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is the reason I'm bringing this up is simulation is the idea of having future options, which links back to empowerment in the sense that um, empowerment quantifies the number of future options.
May I correct the statement
Please do
because
correct me. Yes.
simulation was my personal speculation. I
Okay.
remember in which context we said
Yeah.
that I have to make sure that I do justice to the author of this work.
Of
This
course.
is
Of course.
Carlotta Langer with Nihat I. So Carlotta's thesis was about a really remarkable piece of work, by the way, very recommended. Um, about the question that if you're an organism, there is this concept of embodied intelligence. So where your body solves many problems for you. You don't have
Mhm.
to control everything by the brain. In fact, it turns out that if you do that well, the brain can be simple, right? If there's little to do for your brain and the body does all the work, you
Yeah.
can basically delegate all the movement to the body or much of the movement. You can have these
Cool.
brainless walkers, these walkers that are robots that have no brain, no electronics, and they just walk and look very natural
Hmm.
at that. So the question is, how does that actually, doesn't that not contradict to the idea that a high phi, a high value of this complexity, of the brain complexity,
Hmm.
is actually linked to consciousness? It looks like, okay, actually we want brainless action, being automatic and smooth and like a consciousless dancer. There's a
Hmm.
beautiful essay by Heinrich von Kleist about let me think what it was the about the puppet theater. It's a
Ah.
fascinating thing, and where he says, okay, you have these completely consciousless puppets, and they move so gracefully, and then once you become humans, you become self-conscious and become actually bad at moving, and you have to become absolutely superb again to be again this graceful movement. So it's almost like there's a deep valley of disconcert and this discomfort in between. But how does it compare to this consciousness part? Now, personally, I think um, when there are dichotomies like that, there's an interesting truth hidden in there. And Carlotta Langer, she actually addressed that. And so she was asking this question, why would you be able to reduce your brain power if your body is intelligent? But on the
Hmm.
other hand, this measure of conscious thought, as some people think, or at least of complexity, goes up. She doesn't argue about the consciousness part. She's completely technical, mathematical, experimental.
Mhm.
And the result, now it's a spoiler, and science, there are no spoilers, but still, it's a spoiler if you don't want to read the thesis, is that as long as you do not need to, um, as you don't need to um, uh, change your decision making all the time, it's fine to delegate. It's fine to be natural and smooth and
Mm.
graceful. When you need to learn, however, and to acquire and integrate new information and
Mm.
new behaviors, that's when you need the complexity. So I really
Interesting.
like this dichotomy.
Mm.
It's very clear if it's you making something very standardized and become smoother and smoother, you actually don't want it. You want to get rid of any decision making
Mm.
overthinking. You want to be automatic when
Interesting,
you're
interesting. It's about how ingraining habits actually, in a way, reduces this phi, and that's what we aim to do. We want to be in a habitual way so that we are at ease with our environment, we act at ease with our environment. But when we are learning, we are increasing the need to kind of restructure our
yes
inner combinations, and that's where the
yes
phi, therefore, would increase because of the restructuring.
yes yes that's her insight. I really like the depth of this thought because it makes clear that there are these different parts, the things that are established, the things that are being learned, and how they interact.
That's fascinating. Very, very interesting. Yeah. I saw that the picture of you guys after probably the submission.
That was
So there's
actually the day of the examination, it seems. So yes.
all right.
So her supervisor is on the right, and and in the middle, that's Verena Hafner, also an excellent scientist in the area in Germany, in Berlin.
Great. Fantastic. I think I found the this the marionette, he calls it.
Yes, it's actually über das Marionettentheater, but I thought it might be easier to find this puppet
A puppet,
theater.
yeah. I looked for puppet, yeah.
Yeah. But I really recommend this essay. Kleist is a wonderful essayist. I really think he's one of the. I mean, everybody talks about Goethe and Schiller. In my opinion, he's the underappreciated third in the list.
Fantastic. So so here, just coming back to the concept of empowerment, I feel like empowerment uh, is not relating to learning in this simple dichotomy. I may be wrong, but when we are aware, we have already learned and we are already empowered. And when maybe there's a moment or the environment changes and we no longer know how to interact, we lose our empowerment. Or so, in that sense, the capacity to simulate a future um, doesn't necessarily mean that you're learning. It just means that you're simulating. What do you think of these thoughts?
That is okay. Let's disentangle that. But I really like
Mm,
the tangled branches you gave me.
mhm,
So empowerment is not about learning. Yes, it is static measure at the way it is, but it tells you what you want to do. So what you want to do, you want to move to states with higher empowerment. But of course, if you improve your model, so empowerment requires a forward model. You need to have an idea what's going to happen because you can't do everything that you could do. So think of empowerment a bit like money, right? The comparison is actually not that absurd. Money is a potential. It's not what you do, it's not what you spend, it's what you could get, right? So
mm,
if I have a lot of money, I could say if I have one pound, well, the best probably I can get is a pack of chewing gums, or a
mm,
pack of tissues or something like that. That's about it, right?
mm,
So it's limited what I can do with that. If I have £1 million, also I can get less than I thought than in the past for that. Maybe I can get a small flat in London or in the bad area of London or something, right? So but the point is, if there's more of it, you can do more. Doesn't mean you do more. You could take the money and put it in the
Mm-hmm.
bank,
Mm-hmm.
and then and just make it become more. So empowerment can be spent or
Mm-hmm.
it can be invested, and it is actually exactly what you do. You could decide that, for example, you build up your strength and your muscular strength and so on. At some point, you run the marathon, and then you're completely exhausted, right? So that is like spending your empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So of
Okay.
course,
Yeah.
training builds it up,
Mm-hmm.
but it also short term depletes it. So that's the first thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
With this, you need a model forward to have an idea what your empowerment is. You have an idea what could happen. Because if you don't
Right.
know what could happen, you don't know what your empowerment is, or you have no idea what it is. Now, of course, in nature, I don't think that organisms, especially small insects or less brainy organisms, actually do this full computation. They have just an instinct
Yeah.
that behaves as if it's maximizing something like empowerment, more or less,
Right.
approximately. But if you are an organism with an highly evolved brain, certainly mammals, uh, we know that mice and rats do forward simulations of mazes. We do
Yeah.
definitely know that humans do that.
Mm-hmm.
Ask every chess player. And I would not be surprised if octopuses have some element of forward simulation. They're very intelligent animals.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned them because they're a completely different branch of the evolutionary
Yes.
tree.
I was gonna mention the neuroscience, the hippocampal replay is a very common thing, but I don't know what that would be the equivalent for octopus. They don't have a hippocampus, I think. I don't know.
I don't know about hippocampus. I
Yeah.
do know that they have a cerebellar analogy.
Okay.
They have a cerebellar analogy. I don't know about hippocampus. I would have to find out. But so don't. It's surprising how many parallel evolutionary steps there are, where analogs are being re-evolved.
Mm.
So some things are evolutionary incidents, like the retina. Our retina is badly designed. The blood vessels are in front of the retina. With the
Okay.
octopuses, it's the right
I,
way around. The
and I
retina is in
need
front of
and
the
you,
blood.
sometimes you need glasses. Well, the I'm just kidding. So the other way around, the blood vessels are in front for the octopus.
No, no,
Oh,
they're in front for us.
yeah.
The retina is in front for the octopus.
Okay. Okay.
But the octopus has had bad luck in another respect. They have blue blood. Or I think it's blue or greenish. It's copper-based blood, while we have iron-based blood, which is much better to transport oxygen. So this again is an evolutionary incident.
Mm.
And once you end up in this direction, it's not like a human design where you can design from scratch. In evolution, you have to work with what you have. You can't just
Mm.
redesign everything, right? And there's no smooth transition from copper-based blood to iron-based blood. Now, here's a nice story for some horror science fiction movie of some crazy scientist making the super octopus. That anyway, I stated it now, right? But the point is, when we look at simulation, I do think that simulation is something that we do, but it's super expensive, and I don't think it's something we do very well.
Mm.
Computers are much better at that.
Okay.
So I would actually claim that this whole simulations idea is actually an indicator for the ability to plan, which I think we actually do not do that often. So
Okay.
planning is hard.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Mm.
you making decisions based on a sequential organization is something. There's a reason why we think chess is hard. For
Mm.
computers, it's easy, but the way they are organized,
Mm.
because they can put in stuff and move data very fast and very efficiently and very without errors. For
Mm.
us, this is very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So if you pack your
Interesting.
luggage and you have to play around with it, this puzzle is considered a puzzle. In other words, much of what we do is actually stimulus response sequences. We
Mm-hmm.
do something and we do something with it, we do something and somehow it falls into place. When we have to follow a plan, you write it down, you actually export it, you put it on paper, you make
Yeah.
sure there is a track record that you can easily outsource.
Mm-hmm.
I would say language is one exception where we even in language we don't plan everything. And here again, I recommend Kleist. He's actually talking about the generation of thought as you the generation of speech as you talk. So you
Okay.
talk and then you only make a decision what you're going to say. And that seems to be and it really worth reading. He makes an argument like even great speakers sometimes do not know how they're going to end the sentence.
Nice. I like that. On the gradual construction of thoughts during speech. Worth reading as
Yes.
well.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely amazing essay. As I say, I really like his essays, and I think it captures this point there. You
Mm.
you you make a step after the other, and then
Mm-hmm.
okay, now comes this, now comes this, now comes this,
Mm.
and I've been told I don't have a reference for that. I've been told that horses, when they gallop,
Mm.
they plan one cycle ahead.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, that's
Interesting.
very limited. It's very
Yeah.
limited.
So it's just to wrap up here, what you've just mentioned is that empowerment is a skill that we develop through training. Is that one way we can, one way to see it, or through sometimes it's just an innate aspect that sensors through evolution we've developed this empowerment capacity. But training is a way to reach a higher state of empowerment. Usually, this is because we have a model about what higher state of empowerment we want to reach. Um, and um, well, training is requires depletion of energy. It is cost. There's a cost of energy. There's a cost to that, and it is that's where it is similar. Simulation is also a way of training. You know, when we see studies of pianists training piano, you can train physically. You can also train it by imagining, and it has a very strong similar effect over a week, let's say, of imagining and actual physical training. So the fact of imagining future options is, if you want to do it properly, it requires cost, and there's a sort of um, instinctive aspect, intuitive way of doing it as well, which maybe requires less cost, and that's why we rely on it more, and we do it more on a step-by-step basis, maybe like horses, or as a stimulus reaction way. Um, but training necessarily would uh, make us reach a higher um, would allow us to react to greater complexity if we are trained.
In terms of empowerment, there are two ways
Mhm.
of improve it, right? Because it's actions and sensors. So
Right.
make the actions more accurate means reduce the noise. Remember, we talked about
Okay.
noise. So
Yes.
make the actions more reliable, right?
Mm.
If I'm a great thrower or if I'm a pianist practicing a particular jump, I
Mm.
reduce the noise in my actions and make it more sure that I will hit the right note or will throw the dart directly in bullseye.
Mhm.
Um, but of course, you can refine your sensors too and increase your empowerment that way.
Mm.
So one example is again, I take to literature. There's this yeah, I think I take something unconventional. This novel Perfume, The Perfume, where there's a a genius person with a genius sense of smell, and he hones the sense of smell. And smell is mostly passive. Large parts of that are passive, actually. For most people, it's passive, almost
Right.
passive, right? You navigate or something, but that's about it. And he hones his sense of smell, And it's actually interesting how this novel is built, because he basically goes and becomes an apprentice and a perfume maker. And the perfume maker actually teaches him, well, he learns it himself, but he teaches him to use different substances to get certain effects. But he can't really do that, but he himself learns how to take certain fragrances to achieve a certain effect. So he has this incredibly keen sense of smell, but he has still to learn how to combine existing smells to get the effect he wants. The fact that you know, for example, how you would like a painting to look like doesn't mean that you can actually paint it.
Right. Right.
And this is something that is very interesting, because today, for example, you have this very powerful, for example, music generating
Yeah.
software where you just play keys and you can still have a good idea what you want, but are completely unable to play multiple instruments at a sufficient level. But still, these instruments can help you reach that level very well. So this high sensoric resolution um, and high actuatoric power, they have to come together. And
Interesting.
if you're being helped in the actuatoric power, which modern AIs do, I do think you can still be a good artist, or an effective artist, let's say this way. Um,
Empowered
so
artist.
An empowered artist, nicely put. Yes, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that. It is like a camera. The modern phone cameras make many more people good photographers.
Yes. Fascinating. Fascinating. So the model is based on increasing the accuracy of your sensors or the accuracy of your actions.
Yes, and of course choosing a place where it has an effect. If
Yeah.
I take photographs in the fog, I can have
Yeah.
a most expensive phone and a fantastic how say set
Yeah.
and a good eye, but
Yeah.
doesn't help.
It's not a good picture of the cathedral you're trying to get if there's just loads of fog.
Exactly.
So the environment is an important play there. So fantastic. It has been a fascinating discussion and loads more to dig through. But to finish this conversation, do you have any takeaways that you'd like the listener to take home from what we've discussed today?
There are a couple of takeaways. Number one, perception and action are inexorably linked to how an agent interacts with the world. Um, we do not fully understand at this stage exactly how the agent is different from the world. If we look, I mean, we can look at it a naive way, we see it, but it's once you dig deeper again, I'm turning my diamond around and another as a facet. When you dig deeper, it turns out it's not obvious at all what's making the agents, living organisms, so different from the
Yeah. The environment.
abiotic world.
Yeah.
This is one of the big mysteries that we would like to understand.
Mm.
The idea that information flows between the agent and the world is something that, again, once it's clear something is an agent, that's something we can talk about. But when it's not clear what's the agent, what's the world, and you see that sometimes in proto-life or in very primitive life forms or in things where it's not clear, is this belonging to the world, is it belong to the agent, what is me, who's not me? I
Yeah.
think these are very deep questions. And the other thing I would like to as a takeaway, information is a quantity that you can measure.
Hmm.
It is a bit like energy, and its balance, like energy tells us about the balance of energy tells us something about the physical processes we see. Information tells us something about the cognitive processes that are going on. That is the hypothesis that I'm pursuing, that I think is worth pursuing, that we have just scratched the surface of. But I do think that's this future of understanding cognition and intelligence, because I feel that while we are very successful in getting cathedrals built, we don't yet have a theory of statics or mechanics. We don't have Newton's laws. We know how to build cathedrals, but we do not have Newton's laws. That's
regarding cognition.
Regarding cognition. So we can build the cathedrals, and very impressive, very, very, very powerful, really awe-inspiring. The cathedrals, of course, I'm talking about these big AI systems that you can get, you can toy around, and they're really awe-inspiring, no questions about that.
Yeah.
But the Newton's laws, they came several hundred years later in history. I don't think it will take that much time, because we have already a vestige of ideas where to look at, but I think we do not have them yet. So the goal is to turn something that just makes something work, makes something impressive, moves into science where we begin to understand why it works, how it works, what's its nature, what's its relation to our own cognition, and maybe question about how it relates to our evolutionary history, the history of the world as we know it, and maybe our role as an observer in the universe.
Well, that's fascinating. That's inspiring, Daniel. And thank you so much. It was a fascinating discussion. If people want to get in contact with you, I think your email is the best, or
yes. And I recommend actually using that email. I normally get it if there's a problem, and there's sometimes it's a bit it thinks things are spam that are not, but so try again.
Yeah, follow up. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. It has been a pleasure to discuss, and I will see you very soon.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure, and thank you for the inspiring environment and conversation.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much. See you soon.